Right now, I am sitting at the cemetery here at Cerro Gordo, a former mining town that used to be home to 4,000 residents. And back in the 1800s, Cerro Gordo was a silver boom town fueled by booze and greed. The newspapers back then reported a murder a week, but still nobody knows exactly how many miners are buried in this hill behind me. That's because back then, the headstones were made out of wood, and these headstones have been lost to age, they've been lost to weather, they've been lost to theft. I've heard estimates anywhere from 50 to 500 miners are buried in this cemetery. And it's always been a missing puzzle piece in the history here. But tomorrow, we might figure it out. My friend Paul is bringing up his human remains detection dog, Bosco, and we're gonna try to determine exactly how many people are in the cemetery and exactly where the borders are.
My name's Paul Dosty. I retired from the Mammoth Lakes Police Department as a detective sergeant, and after that I started working as a volunteer with History Flight.
Paul is just an expert when it comes to human remains dogs. You know, his last dog, Buster, before Bosco, Buster was just a star. You know, he lost one of his legs to cancer, so it was a three-legged dog that found literally hundreds of human remains, including some very high-profile soldiers.
4 trips to Europe, and we got 47 U.S. Marines, including the missing recipient of the Medal of Honor. Made 3 trips to Tarawa on that island in 1942. In 76 hours, over 5,000 people died, including 1,000 Marines.
You know, unfortunately, Buster passed away, but Bosco is Paul's new dog, and Bosco is just a star in his own right. And I gotta say, first off, they're just 2 amazing people. Well, I guess 1 amazing person and 1 amazing dog.
Oh, I'm sorry. You on overtime or what?
The thing about human remains is obviously the longer they've been in the ground, the more they decay. So you have to imagine the majority of the miners that are up in the cemetery here have been decaying for 150 years.
I trained him like a bomb dog. So he finds the target odor and then he just lays down and waits for his toy.
Okay.
But can't wait too long because he's gonna come looking for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just that's all they care about is getting that toy. Then they want to play and you got to throw it and everything. So
right.
You have to be very animated when you're working with these guys.
Yeah.
Because they're really happy creatures.
Right.
But they want to play.
Right.
You know, human decomposition to them is like, if I find some of that, I'm getting a toy. As far as the cemetery goes, we'll just get up there and see what we can get. And
okay.
You know, I mean, you could probably run the dog here. You might alert because it's draining down.
Draining all the way down, right?
It's draining all down.
Sure.
But so we can work from the top.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And you know, our main target today was 3. First was to go up to the cemetery. Next, I wanted to go back into Newtown and potentially see if there was a separate cemetery for some of the Chinese miners here. And third, we just kind of wanted to look around, see what else was out there.
This particular breed,
right?
You don't got to worry about no one getting bit.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
right.
Everybody's my friend.
Yeah.
So I guess all the records were destroyed at the fire then?
Yeah, that's what Roger and Cecil told me, that they were all destroyed as far as the number. And I've heard estimates anywhere from like 50 to 500 people are on the hillside.
Wow.
And so it's hard to tell.
And so the idea that we could individually sort the grave sites didn't quite happen today. You know, there's so many people up there that kind of just the whole hillside was triggering for Bosco, meaning that there's, over the years, they're decomposing, the rain's coming, they're washing down the slope, it's kind of just spreading out the human remains all throughout that hillside.
Probably make 4 or 5 runs going straight down, maybe, you know, 5-10 meters apart, and then we'll know where the boundary, at least the top boundary is.
So from there, we kind of just decided that our main goal of the cemetery was going to be defining kind of the outer borders of it. You know, when Bosco stopped signaling, meaning there was a dead area, we know that was kind of the borderline of it. And I think that in the future, there's more technology like ground penetrating radar that we can do to get exact locations of graves in a mass grave like that. We did find individual graves later that I'll get to, but in the graveyard itself, because there's so many people there, it was all just signaling to Bosco. We were able to kind of loosely define the perimeter of what the cemetery would be.
So what we're want to check is here's some soil from a site that we believe someone's buried there. Now it's just in a remote area. You can see this little thing.
Right.
The septum vial, and you can also do mass spec. But what we're going to do now is we're going to see if there's any animal products with the aldehyde compounds. Now, if that's at a grave, it's probably not going to be any dogs or cats. It's going to be a person.
Right.
And we're going to, kind of shake this up.
Mm-hmm.
Open this up. Try not to any on your burger fingers. Not really. Okay. it's turning already.
Oh,
see?
yeah.
Yeah, I don't need any more. It takes a little bit. If it's a suspected grave, it's probably going to be a person, because unless they bury their dog there,
Right.
or something. But in a cemetery, yeah. So we're seeing that really rapid reaction from that
Right.
aldehyde. So it's, Biggs is telling us animal,
Okay.
people or whatever. But if you go to a location and there's no dogs or cats around, then it's
Sure.
going to be a person probably.
Right. All sorts of things in the tool set.
Yeah.
Toolkit.
Okay, so it's draining down this thing too.
Right.
So I'm kind of thinking that there's something up there in those trees.
Just above the 1870 head marker, it seems about 10 feet above that, the cemetery pretty much stops, or at least the hits for Bosco are stopping. So we can assume that above that, not too many people are buried. To the left, if you're looking at the cemetery, there's a pinyon tree that seemingly marks kind of the left border. And to the right, they trenched in a power line, and it seems like that's kind of the right border of the cemetery area. The scramble way up the hill is gonna be a long one. And so we went above it on the road a ways, and we didn't see a lot of hits above that one wash.
So this is what we call the decompositional plume, which is decompositional event, and it's rolling downhill.
Right.
when it rains or something, it pushes
Yeah.
it down here, and then that's why he just boom right there. I
Yeah.
think it was somewhere in here.
Right.
And, after we explore the cemetery, the main cemetery here, I have a few other places I'd like to go with Paul. First, I'd like to go to Newtown. And Newtown is just on the backside of the property over the saddle, and Newtown is also known as Chinatown. Back in the 1800s, in similar mining camps, the Chinese workers wouldn't have the same burial grounds as the rest of the miners, which leads me to believe that if that was the case, there's potentially a second cemetery on the backside of Cerro Gordo. And this is not reported in any of the history books. This has not been reported to me by any of the people that worked here or any of the journals or other research that I've done. But if that theory is true, that again would just add to the history here that was never known before. As we walked up the road further, Bosco triggered on this wash. And this wash was probably about 50 yards of void in between the other cemeteries. So after the one cemetery, Bosco stopped triggering until we got to this wash, where immediately sat down in the wash. And so that would mean potentially a few things. One, above there might be another burial site. Or two, originally Paul thought that it was potentially a second graveyard. Back in the day with these mining camps, a lot of times they wouldn't want the less proper citizens of that town to be buried with everybody else. So prostitutes, gamblers, thieves, sometimes different ethnicities would have to be buried outside of the main cemetery. There's no real flat spot there that would indicate a perfect location for a burial ground. And so Bosco, Paul, and I just walked around for a while, searching out, seeing if anything triggered. And there was 3 places. And the first of which is very interesting. The first place that Bosco triggered was immediately next to what I call the writer's cabin. So next to this cabin on the backside, the final standing wooden cabin, which is next to a mine, directly next to the building, Bosco triggered almost immediately on a very strong scent of human remains. And when we were there, Paul did something really interesting that I thought was just very illuminating on how sensitive these dogs are. Bosco wasn't signaling anywhere else around this cabin, but in that one area, Paul got a rock, really put it in the dirt. That's where the human remains would be. That's what they're picking up on. Took that rock with the dirt elsewhere when Bosco was looking somewhere else, and had Bosco go and try to signal once again. And immediately, when they got to the rock, signaled.
Wow.
Oh boy.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a good training aid. If you have a place where there's someone's deceased or something.
Right.
And he's been there for decades, the rocks are going to be, boom, for the dog really easily.
Right.
So just like you saw there, and then put that rock and see that head turn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
His head's turned before his body catches up.
Right.
And then boom, he alerts on it. We have a pet cemetery. It's out in the brush, but there's hundreds of pets, dogs, cats. And so I'll take one small tube of human dirt from a grave, and then I'll hide it. And he has to go over all those graves and goes over like they weren't even there. He's only looking for what he's been trained for, human decomposition and human blood. That's all he knows. Let's see if he gets it. Okay, let's go all the way up. I'll take you up there. See if you get him. Yeah, because it drains down, it's going to pool right here, right
Yeah.
where your leg.
Right.
Something is going on in that area directly next to the writer's cabin. That was a mine at one point. There was maybe somebody living there at one point. Maybe this was a check-in thing. And I wonder if potentially, if accidents happened inside the mine, if back there, they wouldn't even go through the effort of bringing them to the other side of the mine. They'd just bury them near the entrance. And something that we found a little bit later on would point to that as well. But as we were wandering around, the second place that we came to is there was a flat spot next to the road that when Paul looked at it, he said, that just doesn't look like it should be flat in the way that it was. And so we went over there with Bosco, and on the course of potentially a 30-foot flat spot, he signaled 3 times to indicate that there's 3 separate burials all along what is now a road. We don't know when the road all the way was pushed down there. So this could have been at the time just a beautiful flat spot by some trees that they thought was very appropriate to bury people. As you guys may know, on the backside of the property, there's a famous mine called the Lower Newtown Mine. There's 3 levels to the mine. It's probably the scariest thing I've done in my life, going down that thing. But as we got over by that, we decided to just search around. And right by the mine itself, no triggers, nothing. Bosco wasn't going crazy. But kind of off to the side of the mine, down in a flat area, next to 2 very conspicuous pinyon pines. There's these 2 pinyon pines, almost the exact same age, that are not around any other pinions, that are beautiful, kind of set up in a row. Bosco triggered directly in between those 2 pines. And this one again was maybe 50 feet from the mine. Maybe in its heyday, when the people were to die inside of those mines in a mining accident, whether it was like a fall, a dynamite, a collapse, or this and that, they would just bury them pretty much on the closest flat spot that they had. After that 6th find, 3 in the one place, 2 by the Upper Newtown Mine, 1 by the Lower Newtown Mine, we decided to call it. It's getting quite warm out. Bosco doesn't need to be outside for that long.
We have 3 locations, and it's in an area believed to be where Chinese workers worked. So I think from looking at, we're seeing and, and looking at some of the really old stuff around, that we've located the burial sites of 6 Chinese people.
We didn't do much more around the town proper. I think that's gonna be another day. And I think that's, again, this is kind of like gonna be an ongoing thread as we explore all the different technologies available. I think ground penetrating radar is gonna be next, to where we can actually identify the exact number and potentially position even of some of these graves so we can mark them off. But it makes you think, if they were just burying people here and there, then they could potentially be burying people everywhere throughout these hills. And it kind of changes my mentality that people were just getting buried in a singular cemetery or potentially 2 cemeteries. There's been times in the past when after a big wash, there'll be a bone in the wash, and I always assume that it's just an animal bone, because again, I would assume that it's not by the cemetery, but after seeing this, I don't know. But as far as history goes, I think this is a great first step. I think this is obviously a morbid and kind of sensitive topic to kind of dive into as far as the history of Cerro Gordo goes, but I think it's an important one, and I think it's one that we're just going to continue growing over the next few months. That's going to be informative, one way or the other.